Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live for February 26th. The month of March will be up on us this weekend. It's Addison's 12th birthday on Sunday. Also, my man JB Jamie Bradford, his twins, will celebrate their birthday on March 2nd as well. But today is episode number 1699, and we have got a powerhouse show lined up today. In just a few minutes, we'll be joined by Hale McGranahan. Nobody does it better, covering Gamecock football and Gamecock football recruiting. We'll go in depth on the 2026 class, and I'll have some other questions for Hale about newcomers and what in the world are we going to do at place kicker? Do we know? Does anybody know? I'm hoping Hale knows. If he doesn't know, I'm going to ask Alex too, so you can count on that. But first, let's jump into our Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines, brought to you by the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte area, Nana's Porch, your go-to for all your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, the big backyard bash with the whole hog barbecue. Whatever your catering needs, Nana's Porch has got you covered. And now you can also go to the homepage, nanasporch.com, NANASPORCH.com, not only to get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne. By the way, tell him I sent you to get on their calendar. But if you don't have a catering event, you can order Nana's Porch award-winning pimento cheese, available in the smoky jalapeno and the great regular flavor. It's affordable. Checkout is simple, safe, and secure, and it's quick. Go to the home page, click on pimento cheese. It'll take you to a hyperlink. From there, you're just a few clicks away from having Nana's Porch award-winning pimento cheese delivered right to your front doorstep, absolutely free of charge. No shipping cost. All you pay for is the product. All right, baseball last night in their final tune-up before the pivotal, all-important series against that team from the upstate. They run rule Gardner Webb in 10, 14-4. The Gamecocks are undefeated, 7 winners of 7 straight heading into that Clemson game. Carolina had 5 home runs on the night, 2 coming off the bat of Jace Warda, the JUCO first baseman, who I think is probably playing as the designated hitter. Warda leads the team with 3 home runs. Max Coffer and KJ Scobie each hit their first home run as a Gamecock. And Nathan Hall had his second of the season, a 3-run shot. Jarvis Evans earned the win on the mound, allowing 3 hits and 2 runs and a strikeout in 2 innings pitched. Susay had 2 strikeouts and allowed 1 earned run in 2 innings. Gamecocks used 7 pitchers. Ethan Petrie has been on base in all 9 games. The Gamecocks have 7 run rule wins. They are 9-0 for the first time since 2021. Last night, or yesterday, late yesterday afternoon, the number 17 Gamecock softball team, they earned a run rule back at Ashley Chastain Woodard's former program, Charlotte, winning 10-2 in 6 innings. They are now 16-0. That is the second best start in program history. All right, yesterday it was announced that Malaysia Fulwali was named one of the U.S. Basketball Writers Association's Players of the Week. As last week, she was the team's top scorer and percentage shooter for the week, averaging 19.5 points on 64% from the field, 43% from 3 in blowout wins over Arkansas and at Vanderbilt on Sunday. Joyce Edwards was named SEC Freshman of the Week for the 4th time this season. She averaged a double-double for the week as the SEC Freshman of the Week, 17.5 points, 10 rebounds, 18 against Arkansas was her 3rd straight game, leading the team in scoring, including a personal 7-0 run in the 3rd quarter. And Sunday at Vanderbilt, she had 17 points, 12 rebounds, including 10 offensive rebounds, tying a program record for offensive rebounds in an SEC game, the 4th most by any Gamecock in any game, and tied Aaliyah Boston, South Carolina freshman record. Edwards scored 6 points in a decisive 16-1 run in the 3rd quarter that led to the Gamecocks' victories this week. The last week of the regular season, South Carolina is on the road tomorrow night at Ole Miss, 9 p.m. tip-off on ESPN. And then on Sunday, it will be Senior Day at Colonial Life Arena at 2 p.m. against number 14 Kentucky. That tip-off is at 2 p.m. and the Senior Day ceremony will take place 20 minutes prior to game time, beginning at 1:40. All right, not so good news for men's basketball. After the win against Texas, they did get their first SEC win of the season. But last night, the Gamecocks get boat raced in Columbia, Missouri, 101-71. Missouri poured it on the Gamecocks in the first half and the second half. 52-37 and 49-34. At least the Gamecocks, I mean, they just were colder than a milkshake or colder than I guess a a penguin in a blizzard. Gamecocks just 2 of 23 from downtown, 2 of 12 in the first half, and 0 for 11 in the second half. So those are your Nana's Porch news, notes, and highlights for the day. Let's go out now and welcome in to the program the hardest working man I know on the Gamecock beat, and nobody does it better covering football recruiting than our good friend Hale McGranahan. Hale, welcome in. How's life treating you? Here, I guess we're coming to the end of the dead period. I think in March that gets lifted. Coaches will be back on the road, and then the Gamecocks will be starting spring practice on March 19th. Hale, has the spring game been canceled yet? Do you think that is going to happen?
I doubt it. I hope not. I mean, I think Shane Beamer might be of the mindset that it's been a pretty good recruiting event for him and the coaching staff. So I don't know why they would be in a big hurry to kind of eliminate a way to get recruits to come to campus, because it's always been pretty good for them in terms of the number of guys they've had in. I mean, they'll have guys like Dylan Stewart, maybe not playing in the game, but a couple years ago he was in attendance for it. So, you know, while I understand why some coaches and maybe even some athletic departments, for that matter, want to eliminate it because of the financial burden that it could maybe cause, especially in this day and age with revenue sharing and how important it is to save all the money you can and make sure you're not losing too much of it. But maybe it's another way to be able to bring people together and get them to donate and generate some money. So I'm sure people have excuses and their reasons why they don't want to have a spring game, but I think around here, at least in this community, it's probably a good thing to have it as long as you can, as long as it's, you know, within the rules, whatever those are these days, that you should continue to do it around here.
No doubt. So, but do you think, like, instead of having an actual game, that it turns into some kind of, like in the Pro Bowl where they have skills competition and then play like a flag?
Yeah,
game?
I mean, I could see that being a thing, but at the same time, Keith, like, it's still a tool for the coaches and the players, for that matter, to figure out what the team is going to look like in the upcoming season. Like, I don't know, the way it gets kind of talked about by some of these college coaches is like they don't really see any value in it for their football team. Or, I mean, we know there are going to be a ton of position battles for South Carolina this year, and it's one of the 15 spring practices. Like, you get 15 each spring. At least that's how it's been for a while now. And the spring game is counted as one of those 15. So if coaches don't want to use that opportunity to have a spring practice, and, you know, that's their prerogative. But again, like, I just don't know. I don't, unless it's just totally a financial thing for some of these guys, some of these athletic departments. Like, I don't understand why the football coaches are so, like, gung ho. At least the ones who've been vocal about are so gung ho about not playing it. Like, oh, we don't want our players to get poached from other teams. Like, well, you don't think that all the teams that would want to take your players didn't know about those guys before they had their spring game. Like that's just nonsense to me. I mean, it's I don't know, just a lot of excuses. I don't know. People have their reasons, but I don't know. I think a lot of them are just kind of silly unless you're just really. Again, the big caveat is unless you just really lose a lot of money. If you know Steve Sarkisian says, "Hey, we at the University of Texas, we lose $1 million by having a spring game," then maybe that's a different argument that I'm willing to listen to. But I need to see more other than Matt Rule talking about, oh, we had guys trying to poach our players. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm sure it wouldn't have been any different had you not played a spring game. Like that part to me is just a little dumb.
I agree. Some coaches are more paranoid than others. And like you said, the last time South Carolina won at least 8 games, they had that hot streak at the end of the 2022 season, boat racing Tennessee after probably the most putrid performance of the Shane Beamer era in the swamp at Florida, and then beat Clemson. This year, South Carolina wins 6 straight to end the season. Well, the last time Carolina did that and played in a New Year's Day Bowl, the Gator Bowl, they got early commitments from 2 5-stars, Josiah Thompson, Dylan Stewart. They got early 4-star commitments from Wendell Gregory, from Michael Smith, from Cam Pringle. Blake Franks was an early commitment. The success kind of, even though it ended up being just a 16-person class, it was filled with really good high school players that are all pretty much, other than the guys that redshirted, Jalewis Solomon, Kelvin Hunter, just a lot of really good players. I guess Judge Collier as well, who was a starter, Vakari Swain. South Carolina now coming off 9 wins. They currently have 5 commitments. Jazavian Currents, the big safety from South Point and Rock Hill. Peyton Dyer, who at least on one of the other recruiting services has already been elevated to 4-star status. 6'1", 190 out of Duluth, Georgia. Keenan Britt, who was up for the 6A Alabama Lineman of the Year, who's probably an outside linebacker or an edge at 6'2", 230. Jamel House on 3 ranks him, the tight end from Newberry, as a 4-star. And then Anthony Baxter, the big interior offensive lineman, also from South Point. So they're off to an earlier start than even last time. Hale, just in general, as we sit here at the end of this dead period, I know you've made several crystal ball projections for some pretty talented guys. Ryan Mosley, who, again, at least on 3, they have him as a 4-star guy. Rodney Dunham, a guy that on 3 now has on the cusp of being a 5-star. I mean, I could go on and on. Tamarian Watkins, William Vaughn. Talk to us just about the momentum South Carolina has in recruiting.
Yeah, they have a good deal of it, and I think it's kind of similar to what you're, I think, alluding to at the start there, with coming off the 2022 season and how that ended and what they were able to do from a recruiting standpoint. So yeah, there's they're all those crystal ball picks, and out of all those guys, I would say I probably feel the best about Tamarian Watkins. Dunham's visited a ton, and he's got some other pretty significant folks coming after him. So does Watkins, for that matter. Like, they're both Georgia targets. Ryan Mosley is a Georgia target too, obviously. So yeah, and there are quite a few other guys out there who I could probably have shot from the hip a little bit and made some early picks for in that 26 class. It's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds over these next 3 or 4 months. I would think there's probably going to be some more movement. Just generally speaking, that's kind of how it goes here as it gets into the spring and early summer. Then we'll of course see a lot more in June, July, and into August as guys are trying to get their decisions made before senior season starts. So, it's rubber's starting to meet the road. You mentioned a little earlier when you brought me on, Keith, about coaches being back out on the road. They will not be back out on the road immediately in March. The schools can host recruits starting on March 3rd, I think it is. This is the first day out of the dead period. Then the contact period begins, I want to say like mid-April is typically, mid to late April is when it opens up for the spring evaluation period. And that's when coaches are able to get back out and go visit guys. And we'll be able to do that pretty much through the end of May before they start having camps in June, or I guess the end of May when they start having camps. So, yeah, just that's kind of a broad look at things right now.
All right, so before we dive into some particular positions and guys that I want to ask you about, Hale, what could you share with us? Maybe some tidbits on the early enrollees, the newcomers. Let's start with all those freshmen that came in, many of which came in for bowl practices for a week in Columbia, but now 20 of South Carolina's high school guys, and I guess you got to count Xavier Hardy as a junior college guy. 20 guys are enrolled. What have you heard about maybe a few of the standout guys from the early enrollees?
Yeah, I mean, there are 5 receivers, and most of those guys, from what I understand, have done really well. Offensively, it's probably going to be tough for an offensive lineman to really make an early impression. Just kind of the nature of the position and what's asked of those guys and how different it is at the college level for them. You could say the same for defensive line as well, even with like Xavier Hardy. A couple of the freshman linebackers, Donovan Darden, who ended up 24/7 in their rankings, was the highest rated guy in the class, and he's someone that I've heard good things about so far. And interestingly enough, the lowest ranked position player in the class, not counting Kyler Farrow, the long snapper who's enrolled early, and Max Kelly, the kicker, who was not enrolled early. So not counting those guys, AJ Holloway is the lowest ranked guy in the class by 24/7 Sports, and apparently he's off to a nice start as well. So there's been some good things I've heard about those guys. Of course, some of the transfers, Jalen Brown seems to be doing well, which not really a surprise because he played a little bit at Missouri and was somebody that the staff was super fired up about getting him to come in and compete possibly for that starting spot vacated by Kyle Kennard. So yeah, there's been some of the transfers who have made some noise too. Those linebackers, as everyone probably could have foreshadowed, have done well also. So lots of holes to fill, but there's here in the early going, very, very early going, it seems there are some names who are starting to emerge, and long way to go. I hope folks who are listening or watching, don't hear some of those names and think automatically like, all right, those guys are going to be starting come Atlanta against Virginia Tech in that game. So that's just some of the very early stuff I've been hearing.
So I'm not really surprised about AJ Holloway. I mean, he's got the prototypical size. I mean, on the roster now, I think he's like 240 pounds. He played at one of the premier high school programs in the state of Georgia at the highest level. I mean, he's coming in with a pretty high floor, so to speak, and he just looks like a guy that is a Mike linebacker. And Donovan Darden, 6'4", 230. We'll see how much longer he stays at linebacker. One day he may wind up with his hand in the dirt, or at least some of the time, but playing that edge spot. I think he has an incredibly high ceiling.
Yeah, that's a great point about Holloway, Keith. You say one of the best high school programs in the state of Georgia. Well, that automatically makes it one of the best high school programs in the country. I mean, Buford High School is a damn factory. They just churn them out, and I'm kind of. I don't want to say I'm kicking myself quite yet because let's get a little bit further along into this thing with these guys. But AJ Holloway, who was someone when I was watching him and trying to think about what he might be, is he's going to play between the tackles and make run stops, and you know what? If there's some third downs or some goal line situations in Atlanta against Virginia Tech, like probably kind of a no-brainer situation if you need more than a couple linebackers out on the field to put a guy like that who can just read those guards and go from there and give you a few snaps doing that, and if you increase his workload over the season, great. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Also, just given the fact what we saw with last year's defense when they had a lot of capable linebackers or linebackers there are comfortable playing and just being able to have somewhat of a rotation there as opposed to trying to play the same two guys 60 plus snaps because that's what you got. So yeah, again, early on in this thing, but if Holloway can continue to progress, it makes a lot of sense because again, he's played a lot of linebacker, whereas guys like Donovan Darden or Tayshawn Alston, who are in this linebacker class, the freshman linebacker class, even Josh Smith, those guys played a lot of defensive end in high school, and so they're, maybe still kind of learning the subtleties of the position, and obviously it's a different level in college, but there's something to be said for a guy who's just been a straight up linebacker and likes to hit and play between the tackles. Not to say those other guys don't, but he's done a lot of that over the years at a high level in high school.
That's the old Will Muschamp ism that he got from Nick Saban. I think AJ Holloway's a guy that sticks his face in the fan and likes it.
Yeah, I almost said it, but I didn't want to because I didn't want to ruffle the host feathers. So I held off on that one.
No, I mean, look, I appreciate everything Will Muschamp did. Shane Beamer ought to appreciate him as well because that last full recruiting class Muschamp brought in was the foundation for Shane Beamer getting to the bowl game that first season. And a lot of those guys were still there this year as a core group of veteran guys and captains to help them win a lot of games. So, hey, he didn't win enough games, but he did have some good one-liners and brought in some good players. All right, so I got to ask, Hale,
Okay.
What are we doing at place kicker? Okay, last year, we talked about it in the spring and the preseason. South Carolina was going to go into last season with a kicker who had never attempted a field goal in the game. Well, right now you got essentially one guy on campus that I know of, Peyton Argent, and you got Max Kelly coming in the spring. I know at the bowl practices, Joe DeCamillis was caught on audio and video saying, hey, we may need to look in the spring transfer portal to see what's out there. Is Shane Beamer going to go into another season with a kicker who's never attempted a field goal in a college football game?
Possibly. William Joyce is another guy who's on the team right now. Walk on, who's from Spartanburg. I think he's a redshirt senior, so he's been around for a while. But yeah, it certainly looks that way, Keith. That it'll be another inexperienced place kicker. Who knows what could happen during the spring portal window. Like you said, Jody didn't really pull any punches. He said they could try to get a transfer guy, and they obviously didn't get one during the first portal window. So we'll see if an opportunity presents itself in the second one. That'll obviously and we'll have an answer to that question maybe here in 2-3 months. But yeah, right now I would say I guess the best answer is to be determined. Don't know.
I mean, I agree. I just, to me, and I know Darren Usher is not watching or listening live, but if somebody can get this little snippet of audio, yes, South Carolina should be aggressive, pursuing more defensive tackles in the spring portal period. But for me, getting an experienced place kicker, I think, should be the top need because, I mean, South Carolina, Hale, was a couple of kicks away from being in the SEC championship game and the college football playoff. So that's all I'll say about that. All right.
I don't know. I'll say this, Keith. On kickers, sort of the psyche, which I have a little bit of personal insight. The psyche of a kicker can be very fragile. And the San Francisco 49ers probably overdrafted a kicker, Jake Moody, who's on the team right now. And he's not been the best since he's been with the 49ers. I'm sure some folks might remember when Tampa Bay drafted Roberto Aguayo from Florida State, higher than I can't remember what round it was. Maybe the second round.
I think it was like third or fourth round they drafted.
Yeah, either way, he lasted a year there. So if you kind of overdo it with the kicker, you can almost run the risk of putting a little too much pressure on the guy. I think Mitch Jeter might have ran into that a little bit to start the season at Notre Dame. Obviously he righted the ship and everything was fine for them. But, if you hit the transfer portal and you're like super aggressive and you do whatever and you bring in a guy like, and you're like, you're the guy, go do it. No pressure, right? Well, that's I don't know. That adds a little bit more to maybe some of the psyche in sort of ways. Again, generally speaking, I don't know. Maybe they can go get a guy, and what I'm saying just is stupid and a waste of everybody's time. But at the same time, that's just sort of something that has to be considered, in my opinion. If that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't make sense what I just said, but it does to me.
No doubt. So Gamecock, I mean, even if you bring a guy in, though, you're still going to have competition. I mean, that is one of the core values of Beamer's program. But
Yeah.
I'd rather go into the season with a guy that's done it before and done it well than never had to do it in a pressure situation. So, Hale, no real surprise. I didn't think South Carolina would ever land Jared Curtis. I didn't think the juice would be worth the squeeze. The revenue share and NIL money that you're going to have to pay for that guy with, Lenora Sellers, who's still just a redshirt sophomore, a former 5-star, and Prentice Air Noland, and, Cutter Woods has evidently come in and turned some heads. And I mean, I lost my train of thought. Dante Reno is not exactly chopped liver. And so now it looks like for the time being, it's Brady Smigel, who's still never been on campus, and Landon Duckworth, who committed too soon. What are your thoughts on the Gamecocks quarterback situation, or for that position moving forward for 2026?
Yeah, it would appear right now those are the two candidates. I don't know if it's a given that either one will be in South Carolina's class. Like they've still got some work to do with Smigel. You mentioned he's never visited, and that's notable. But I think South Carolina's been in a really good spot with him, despite that. Then Duckworth, we'll see with him. I mean, generally guys don't recommit to schools they decommit from, even though Jared Curtis might end up doing that with Georgia. So, yeah, I don't know if there's anyone else who's a serious candidate for an offer. I'm sure they've got a list of names that they've been evaluating and considering and kind of planning for if and when they do need to expand the offer board at that position for 2026. And obviously there's the portal as well. So that can always be a potential avenue. Even if they do get a high school guy at the 2026 level or in the 2026 class. I mean, you just never know. It's very fluid, as everyone knows. I'm not, saying anything real groundbreaking here. Things can change in this day and age with the portal and guys leaving. I mean, if Lenore Sellers has a great season and goes pro, who's to say another one of those three guys doesn't decide he wants to transfer because he doesn't think that he's necessarily going to be the guy moving forward. So you just kind of have to wait and see from that standpoint. But yeah, I think somebody, when I was doing another show last week, asked me if I could see South Carolina taking 2 2026 quarterbacks, and they're kind of framing it within those three guys. This was before Curtis said he was just Georgia and Oregon. And I was like, I don't think they'll have that decision to make. Like, I don't think South Carolina is going to be in a spot to decide whether or not they want Smigel and Duckworth. But, I could certainly see a scenario where it's, one of those two guys and, a portal quarterback at some point down the road. So, yeah, lots of work to be done over these next couple months for sure when Smigel gets in for his visit at the end of March.
All right, so we know South Carolina is always top priority for South Carolina in recruiting, but it looks like now with Mac Brown gone at North Carolina, with the slide, Wake Forest making a coaching change, NC State not exactly setting the woods on fire, and and South Carolina chipping away in the state of North Carolina, that this year they are in on several big-time prospects. We touched on Rodney Dunham, 6'4", 227, who, like you said, hopefully is at that spring game just like Dylan Stewart was 2 years ago. But you've also got the Harris twins, Aiden and his twin brother, who I did not write his name down.
Andrew,
that's right. I knew it started with an A. Then you've got 2 defensive tackles in Noah Clark and Ben Bolware. You've got an elite corner in Samari Matthews at Huff High School right outside of Charlotte. And you've got a big-time wide receiver in Gordon Sellers with an A, not spelled the same as Lenoris or Jaden. And he's at Providence Day in Charlotte. How do you see as far as the Gamecocks and their involvement with these prospects? And most of them have been on campus a number of times. How do you like South Carolina's chances with some of these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly an opportunity to make some noise in that state. I don't want to say anything too crazy about Bill Belichick because he's obviously Bill Belichick, but it seems to me that it's gotten off to kind of a slow start up there from a recruiting standpoint. And then just whether it's talking to some of these guys from North Carolina or just reading what they're saying to other folks or just reading whatever else is out there on the internet that's not my reporting, I don't get the sense that North Carolina's a great factor with many of those guys you just named, Keith, which is pretty wild to me. So, yeah, certainly an opportunity for South Carolina and plenty of other folks to
I don't know, maybe.
What was that you kind of cut out?
No doubt. I mean, I saw Bill Belichick. Sorry, I don't know on our connection, but I saw Bill Belichick. I think he was at the North Carolina basketball game sitting next to his 27-year-old girlfriend, and he was fading off to sleep. There was a lot of conversation last night on the Garnet and Black Town Hall about that, about why he's fallen asleep at a basketball game, or even when he was on the Monday Night Football broadcast with Peyton and Eli, he kind of was fading off. And I said, well, I mean, the guy does have a 27-year-old girlfriend, so maybe he's gone the way of Coach O. So, Hale, can't thank you enough for being with us. Spring is right around the corner. It's crazy to believe March will be here this weekend. All the best to you and your family, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. Thanks for coming on today.
Keith. Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me on as always, and hope you have a good one as well.
All right. Take care. That was the great Hale McGranahan from thebigspur.com. So while we wait for Alex, who's just popped in, this is the last week of the regular season. We all know we're not talking about the Gamecock men's basketball. Gamecock women's basketball, if they win their final 2 games this week, Texas plays Mississippi State and Florida, who are both having losing records, at least in the conference. Both teams will be tied at 15-1. They'll get a share of the SEC regular season title. Each one will get a trophy. But then, instead of going to point differential or looking at common opponents and margin of victory, or who's played the tougher schedule, they just flip a coin to determine who's the number one seed in the tournament. And so we'll wait to see what happens. Let's bring in our good friend, the Hampton County, the pride of Hampton County, Alex Jones from the BigSpur.com. Alex, how the hell are you?
I'm doing great. Always doing great. Good to be back with you.
Great to have you on. So we just got off with Hale, and there were a couple questions I wanted to ask him, but we were running short on time. So, for the longest time, it looked like we were going to have 19 or 20, and then it looked like we were going to have 21 early enrollees from the 26-man signing class, right? And so at one point, it looked like it would go from 21 to 19 because it didn't look like Kendall Daniels Jr. and Damola Adjadon were going to make it in. Then Kendall Daniels made it, and then I guess there were some issues with the transcript, but it got cleared up, and Damola Adjadon was the last one to come in. But then somewhere in the shuffle, defensive end Kobe Saki Pra out of the Roswell, Greater Atlanta area, who they listed at 6'6", 235 instead of 6'3", which is what he was listed by 24/7 Sports and On3. Now he's not an early enrollee. Do we know what happened there? Was he came and enrolled, and then they said, well, there's an issue, so you can't enroll? What kind of went wrong there?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not too sure what happened. I think that's one of those we'll see what we can find out here in the future. But I mean, it's big for all these guys to get in that you mentioned early, just because of what you can get early on, get going from spring practice. And I mean, obviously, it's a majority of the class has gotten in, and having those guys already in spring practice, they can get a head start on adjusting to college. And obviously, those wide receivers, those 5 receivers that are on campus, that's going to be one that a lot of people are going to be watching in spring practice. And obviously, do not forget Donovan Murphy. I mean, he'll be in the summer, but that guy, he could end up coming in the summer and being ready to go and starting right away. I mean, that guy's really, really good. But I mean, just having those guys already in and getting ready for, already going through winter workouts to get into spring practice, that's big for those guys to go ahead and be in the program.
So there are 20 early enrollees, and I think the 2 critical guys that are not in, well, really 3, Donovan Murphy, Max Kelly, because that's getting ready to be my next question. And then I think we all really wish Christian Ingram would have made it in, simply because that's another, you don't have a ton of defensive tackles. You don't have a whole lot of experience of that position. And this was a guy that you did beat Southern Cal, Michigan, Georgia, and Kentucky for at 6'6", 290. So you'd have probably liked to have him on campus for 8 months before fall camp begins. But what's the plan at place kicker? I mean, is Shane Beamer really going to go into the second straight year with a kicker who's never attempted a field goal in a college game? And in this case, not even an extra point if you're talking about Peyton Argent and I guess William Joyce, who had been a punter, is now kicking, and you're bringing in Kelly. I mean, I know Darren Usher was on with JC, and they talked about how defensive tackle was still going to be a major priority in the spring portal period. But, I mean, Alex, honestly, if you would have had a healthy Mitch Jeter, and there's no guarantee, he did, have I think a quad or a groin injury at Notre Dame. South Carolina was potentially 2 kicks away from being 11-1 and in the SEC championship game and in the college football playoff last year.
Yeah, place kicker is really going to be interesting to watch in spring practice. And I think you kind of mentioned Max Kelly not being an early enrollee. That probably would have been ideal for them to find a way to get him in just to see, okay, are we going to be okay with him being the starter if that's where they want to go? But now you want to get him into the summer. And, they didn't add one in the transfer portal this past portal window. We'll see if somebody pops up in the spring portal window. But I think that's a legitimate question to have because, you're going to have really nobody on the roster with experience at that kicker position. And that's obviously we've seen how pivotal that position can be. And, maybe Max Kelly comes in the summer and obviously maybe after the spring portal window, but maybe he comes in and they feel good about it. But maybe that's a risk they'll have to take. But I wouldn't be surprised if when the spring portal window it opens up that they're looking in the portal to see if they can find the right guy.
Well, hey, I'm all for spending on the right defensive tackles, but for me, we know the SEC is the premier conference in the country. Not just in football. Look at men's basketball this year. South Carolina's women's softball is 17th in the nation. That's only 9th best in the SEC, and all 4 of the top 4 teams are from the SEC. Baseball's going to be the same. Gymnastics, equestrian. You can go on and on. But with the margin of error and the margin of victory being so thin, that field goal at Alabama and certainly that kick at the LSU game to send it in overtime, no guarantee you win in overtime, but you probably have a lot of momentum there. Hell, even if you just make the one against Alabama, that gives you 10-2 instead of 9-3, you're in the college football playoff, even if you're not in the SEC championship game. Hypothetically speaking, and look, we know there are rule number 1 in college football right now is there are no rules. Okay, it used to be, Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith show. He talked about rule number 1. And then rule number 2 was obey all rules. Well, there are no rules. And so hypothetically speaking, if there happened to be a really good place kicker who just might be from the state of South Carolina who happens to kick for a school that's not in the SEC, but that's located in the mountains of Southwest Virginia, who hit a 56-yarder in a bowl game, wouldn't you want to tamper and do whatever it takes to get a guy like that to come home?
Yeah, I think at this point with the position or the place kicker battle that they're going to find something like. So the thing with Kelly is when you watch his highlights, he's got a huge leg. That guy, but as you mentioned at the top of this question, it's different kicking in high school than coming into the SEC with 80,000 fans watching you on big kicks. And maybe he can do it. We'll see. But the thing, not only is place kicker a question, but they have him to replace a lot on special teams. Obviously Kai Kroger's off and gone and got a good chance to have a spot in the NFL. Hunter Rogers too. He's all, and so they got a lot to replace. And obviously Mason Love's a guy that they really, really like. And, Joe DeCamillis at the Citrus Bowl talked about how much they like him and the improvements he made this year. But that's another spot. Punter they got to fill in. Obviously, like I mentioned, you got Mason Love there, but then you got long snapper to replace too. So, special teams, they're going to have some questions this year that they're going to have to, answer. And we'll see what they have in spring practice.
Well, look, normally you would not give a long snapper a scholarship unless he was a dude, right? That's normally a preferred walk-on position, just like Hunter Rogers, who wound up being maybe the best in the country and earned a scholarship. But Kyler Farrow, 6'3", 220 from Heartland, Wisconsin, they gave him a scholarship. He is considered one of the premier long snappers in the country, and he is in. And so I am counting on him to be a long snapper. I know that there will be competition because there have been some other guys that have been waiting behind Hunter Rogers there. Mason Love ended up as Cole's Kickers' #1 punter in the nation. He also is a great kickoff guy. And look, Max Kelly's got a strong leg, but so did Mitch Jeter. And before him, so did Ryan Suckup. And neither one of those guys was the field goal kicker as a true freshman. Now, Ryan Suckup kicked a long time in the NFL. And, you know, you look at Max Kelly, and I'm not comparing him to him, but very similar size, 6'2", over 200 pounds, with a strong leg. But again, like you said, you know, you don't want to be in Tiger Stadium at night facing LSU with a 45-yard field goal to win the game or send the game into overtime with 4 seconds left on the clock with a guy that's never done it before in a pressure situation.
Yeah, that's 100% right. It's just they'll have to figure out something to do, and maybe they trust Max Kelly can come in and be ready to go. But, you know, we'll see kind of what this portal window looks like if they can find anybody.
Yeah, I don't think Joe D would have gone on the record at the Citrus Bowl if that was the case. I think he's probably hoping, and look, just like on Law and Order, okay, that thing I said does not speak of anybody's true identity. It was strictly a hypothetical just for dramatic effect. All right. So let's talk about some position battles. Spring practice will be here before you know it, March 19th. First, Alex, give us what, and I asked Hale the same thing, what you've heard about the early enrollees. Obviously, we know the 5 wide receivers. All of those guys have had their moments, but maybe just pick out some other guys that you've heard about. Let's talk first about the freshmen, and then we'll get into the transfer portal guys.
Yeah, and I think one is Donovan Darden, the linebacker, you know, out of Havelock. He was a guy who, I mean, it sounds like he's already off to a strong start, and he was a guy who's a late riser. South Carolina really kind of identified him early and got him in for that spring game. I think offered him that spring game, and I think in the summer he committed to South Carolina, then just continued to rise the rankings. I mean, a big physical guy, really kind of played edge in high school, but then the Shrine Bowl went and moved to linebacker, where South Carolina's been recruiting him all along, and really showed out and rose in the rankings. I think ended up being a top 150 guy. He really impressed, had a pick 6 in the game, and it sounds like he's kind of continued that so far. And, you know, I think another one would be Cutter Woods. I mean, I think he's coming, and I think his impressions have been really good so far. And obviously we know what the quarterback room kind of looks like right now, but he's a guy who sounds like it's off to a really good start, and that's a very positive sign for South Carolina in the future.
No doubt about it. So how about as far as the transfer portal guys? I mean, you look on the updated roster and you see Prentice Air Nolan, 6'3", 222 pounds. I mean, he's basically a carbon copy of Michael Penix Jr., minus the 19 injuries Michael Penix Jr. suffered in college, and he's going to be a redshirt freshman. Usually the backup quarterback is the most popular guy on campus, but I don't know if that'll be the case. But I think he's a guy that is probably so good that you're going to have to play him some, just because Lenora Sellers is such a dynamic runner. You can't afford to have what happened in the second half of, or late in the first half of that LSU game or the Kentucky game, where he's missing significant period of time and you don't have another guy ready to roll and run your offense.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that stands out about Aaron Nolan so far is his size. I mean, he's listed. I think he was listed at Ohio State maybe closer to 200, but right now on the spring roster, he's at 6'3", 225, which is pretty good. I mean, he need to continue to come in and build weight, and it sounds like he's done that at being at 225. So he's one that I think has made strong impressions so far. And a few two of the defensive linemen that kind of come to mind are Jalen Brown at edge and Devontae Miles. Now, obviously, you got Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy was kind of like the headline maybe of that interior defensive line haul, but, he's had a good start too. But then I think Devontae Miles has also had a pretty strong start as well. And a guy who listed at 6'5", I mean, he can play it. And we know about the depth in that room, and I think he's going to be one that continues to rise the depth chart maybe and is going to be relied on. And we'll see what they do at that position in the transfer portal. I think that's another one you mentioned it too, that they're probably going to look for when the spring portal comes around. But Jalen Brown, obviously, it sounds like he's off to a good start as well. He's one. Missouri didn't want to lose him, and he was really good. South Carolina really liked him in high school, and I think he's got a chance to have a really good career at South Carolina and maybe start off strong. And I think as well the linebackers too, Justin Okoronkwo and Sean Murphy. I mean, those guys. I mean, we know what South Carolina has to replace that linebacker, so those guys have a strong chance to come in and play right away. And Ross Sulfaison, have to mention him too. I mean, he's come in and looks like he's ready to go as well. And that was one. I think that I think ESPN listed him as maybe the one of the big under the radar pickups in the transfer portal, and I think that's absolutely right. I think he's got a really good chance to be good this year.
All right, so you mentioned so many guys on defense. I wanted to kind of talk about some of these position battles. So, look, we know Dylan Stewart. Unbelievable. Most people, I mean, my guy, Michael W. Bratton at that SEC podcast, he ranks him as the #1 returning player in the Southeastern Conference. I mean, he was a freshman All-American, freshman SEC, with him and Kyle Kennard, it was kind of pick your poison. And, I mean, I think he got held as much as Clowney did. And they wouldn't call it because it was like, well, it's just not fair the way he can bend. We know he's starting. Okay, we know that. All right. But opposite him, there's a slew of guys. Jalen Brown, you mentioned, I like him. I liked him out of high school. We know Sterling Lucas and Clayton White really liked him. He went to Missouri. Obviously, he's gotten off to a good start. JT Gear will be a fifth-year guy now. He's kind of been banged up in his time at South Carolina. Brian Thomas Jr. is a guy that Clayton White we know loves. He's been productive. Desmond Umeozulu, and let's not forget about Wendell Gregory. We know he redshirted last year, but this is a guy with elite pass rush ability, and a guy that I think is a hybrid that can play standing up or in space or with his hand in the dirt. And you got Desmond Umeozulu, and I hadn't even mentioned any freshmen because they're probably not going to have to play because you got all of these other guys.
Yeah, that was what I was going to mention. I think you maybe hope in this 2025 season that the freshmen don't have to play in Anthony Addison, Jaquavius Dodd. Let them have a year where they can kind of develop like we've seen some of these other freshmen develop. But as far as other side of Dylan Stewart, I mean, I think one you really have to keep an eye on is Brian Thomas Jr. It seems like he every time he's been in that second group, he plays a lot. And the thing that stands out with him is like when he comes in, you can tell he's going just all out. Like it's 100% effort, and he will give everything to get to the quarterback or stop the run. So I think he's one that, he needs to be watched for maybe that other starting defensive end spot. And you mentioned it, Wendell Gregory. He's one that I'm really interested to see in spring practice. Like he started out at linebacker, and then maybe right in the preseason camp, we noticed he moved to that edge spot. And I thought maybe that's where he fit best at the college level because he was really good at Walton County there at edge. I mean, I can't remember his sack totals, but he was really good playing high-level high school football in Georgia coming off the edge, and that's really intriguing. I think having that year last year where he didn't have to play a whole lot and learn from some of those other guys can be really huge for him. And then, Desmond Umeozulu, can he take that next step now heading into his junior season? And he last year kind of took a big step physically. Right now he's listed at 6'6", 255, and I think that's big for him. I think he's needing to continue to gain weight and now we'll see, can he take that big step now to where he is ready to go. So it's a really intriguing room, and without mentioning Jaylen Brown too, who could easily be maybe that other starter. And so that room's got some depth, and we've talked about on here from a recruiting standpoint how well Sterling Lucas has done building that room, and it's pretty good heading into 2025.
No doubt. Wendell Gregory, he's just chopping wood every day, right? With this nutrition in the weight room, with the strength and conditioning guys, he just keeps getting bigger, stronger, quicker, more explosive, more athletic. All these guys, I can't wait to see what they look like, once the pads come on in the spring. You mentioned Donovan Darden. He kind of reminds me a lot of Fred J.R. Johnson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a late riser. So switching to linebacker, you've only got 2 returning scholarship guys, and that is Fred J.R. Johnson, who played some, but mostly was a special teams guy, and Jaron Willis, who now is listed. He was 6'2", 235. He came in from Ole Miss. He played safety and linebacker and rushed off the edge in high school. Now he's 6'2", 254 pounds. I don't know if maybe that's too big, but he's a guy who's really intriguing because of the explosiveness, the speed, the athleticism. I'm kind of have talked about him kind of like a Bam Martin Scott. Is this the year we're going to see him make the big jump? And then I certainly would handicap Justin Okoronkwo and J.R. Johnson, to me, as the 2 likely starters. I'm not going to discount Sean Murphy because Nick Saban personally vouched for him. And you got Willis, and you got, A.J. Holloway, who's from one of the premier high school programs in the country at Buford High School, who fits into that ideal Mike linebacker, as well as Donovan Darden we mentioned, and a local guy, Josh Smith, who they now list at 6'2", 240 from Dutch Fork. How do you to me, I think it'd be an upset, barring injury, if it's not J.R. Johnson and Justin Okoronkwo when they play Virginia Tech. What's your thoughts on that position?
Yeah, I agree. And with Fred Johnson, I think they were kind of grooming him this freshman year to be that guy, the guy that he's got a good chance to be this year, kind of take over for those trio of linemen who are leaving, or linebackers that are leaving. And I think with him, what was really interesting last year is, one, you heard all the players talk about him and how impressed they were with him in practice, and how he was a listener, and he kind of just soaked up all the knowledge and learned from those older guys. And I remember being at the Oklahoma game and on field level and seeing that he had the green dot at one point, meaning that Clayton White was talking to him. So they obviously were getting him ready and knew that he has what it takes to be this linebacker this year. And he showed flashes last year of what he could be. And I think he's got a great chance to be a starting linebacker. And I agree. I think Okoronkwo has probably got a good chance as well. You saw it in the spring game for Alabama, was really when he flashed. And then you saw him throughout the year. And obviously Alabama was loaded at linebacker. They had Jahad Campbell, who's going to be a high draft pick. And there's another one right now that they had that I'm forgetting his name. But, they were pretty loaded at linebacker, and he was just kind of a little bit down the depth chart. But as you mentioned, he's one who could really, I think, land in that starting spot. And, you mentioned Sean Murphy, too. Nick Saban signed off on him. So obviously there's something there, and South Carolina saw it as well. And I think you kind of mentioned it, but don't forget about the freshman linebackers either. Like, obviously, from a depth standpoint, you're going to need those guys to Raza. But, I really like Josh Smith, and he was really good at Dutch Fork. Another one of those late riser type of guys they keep finding at linebacker, kind of in that same mold of Fred Johnson, really just a late riser guy. And he's one, too. And obviously, we mentioned Donovan Darden. He could be in that 2 deep as well with how he's kind of rose the rankings and the way he started off at winter camp and into preseasons or spring practice. So that linebacker room, obviously there's a few questions. Just any team would have questions losing guys like Demetrius Knight, Debo Williams, and Bam Martin Scott. But they've recruited really well there, and now it's just getting those guys ready to go heading into the preseason camp.
No doubt that should be interesting. All right, so We know about the big tree conundrum. We'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. But to me now, there's the Jalen Kilgore conundrum, because you're losing Nick Eamon-Warry. You want to put your best 5 players on the field in that secondary, whether you're in a 3-3-5 or a 4-2-5 nickel defense. Jalen Kilgore has been the nickel because Nick Eamon-Warry was too valuable at free safety, even though they tried him there, because DQ Smith was too slow to play there. And DQ Smith, you didn't really hear his name called a lot, which was a great thing. He just went about his business and did his job, and really had a great year at strong safety. But you're losing Bruce Feldman's number 1 freak for the NFL draft, a guy that's going to run sub 4.4, that's going vertical over 40, that's going broad jump over 11 feet, and a guy that we know is a ball hawk and a willing tackler. You also brought in Brandon Cisse. You redshirted Jalewis Solomon and Kelvin Hunter, are 2 4-star guys. You also brought in Miles Norwood, and Norwood and Cisse both can play nickel or corner. Vakari Swain's a big physical guy that you could slide in there. I mean, I know they're going to start spring practice. Evidently, Shane Beamer told Wes Mitchell that at nickel. But to me, and look, I love Peyton Williams, and he showed he's capable of being an SEC starter. Hell, they're even playing Jaquel Hallman at nickel, evidently, right now. To me, it just makes too much sense not to put Kilgore at his natural position, because you didn't bring in Cisse to sit, okay, or be a backup. And Jalewis Solomon is thinking, hey, I'm ready to roll now, right? I mean, there's a lot of depth and a lot of talent at the corner nickel position, even when you eliminate Kilgore from that discussion.
Yeah, first off, back to Nick Eamon-Warry, I'm really excited to see him in the combine. I mean, that guy I think is going to test off the charts, and I think he's got a chance to be a really good chance to be first-round draft pick, just the way he's going to test. But, back to, the question with the nickel spot, and I think all the guys you mentioned there, what you're seeing is there's a lot of quality depth, and you almost can't go wrong with any decision that they make. Like, if they decide to keep Kilgore at nickel, we know what he's done at nickel, and he's been really, really good there. I mean, with what he does in run support, that's what kind of took that defense almost to the next level. And obviously, but we also know at safety, he can get it done as well. He's really good there too. I mean, I think he's kind of this next guy from the secondary from Torian Gray to go to the NFL and be a big time dude. But it's really interesting at that in the defensive backfield, because there's so many different options and so many quality options they can go with. And I would almost lean towards right now keeping Kilgore at that nickel spot. And I understand where you're coming from as well, but we've seen just how good he can be there. I think the question would be, and you kind of mentioned it, at safety, do they have what they need at there? Because obviously you got Peyton Williams, who, as you said, has showed what he can do at safety and showed he can be a starting SEC safety. But do they want to maybe have him more in that backup type of role where he's also been really good, and then maybe move to the Jalewis Solomon, move to that nickel spot? Brandon Cisse, I mean, that's obviously one of the most underrated pickups in this class. I mean, he was really good. Does he kind of stick to that corner spot, or does he come into that nickel spot? And I think maybe if he's ready to go and can be Jalen Kilgore level at that nickel, I think you almost do move Jalen Kilgore back to safety, because then that defensive backfield with what you would expect to be Vakari Swain and Judge Collier at corner with DQ Smith at that strong safety spot, that could be this defensive backfield can be one of the best South Carolina's had in quite some time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all boils down to who are the best 5 guys. Like, we know who the best four guys are, right? But that 5th guy, and I tend to believe it's a cornerback like a Cisse or a Miles Norwood or Jalewis Solomon. or Kelvin Hunter, one of those kind of guys. I mean, maybe CZ or Norwood are so good outside, you could even move Swain inside the nickel because of his physicality as well.
Again, it as we're sitting there talking about, it goes back to how many different quality options they have, and it's like they can't go wrong with either one. It's just like you said, do they finding the best five to go out there that they think fits what they're going to do in the best five they can put out there. So it's just they've done an incredible job building that backfield, and with who the starting five goes out there, there's going to be quality depth at every position in that backfield to come in and fill in if need be.
All right, so let's move to offense. Defensive tackle, I think right now, probably the one guy that I would, if I had to bank on being a starter, would be Monkel Goodwine. And it really doesn't surprise me to hear the talk about Devontae Miles, because I think Travian Robertson really has a great idea of what he's looking for and ability to evaluate, kind of like Torian Gray, even though he hadn't been doing it as long. So on the offensive line, you got the big tree conundrum. He starts as a true freshman. He's freshman All-American, freshman SEC, gets banged up. Plus you bring in this 5-star dude named Josiah Thompson, who is a left tackle. Big Tree winds up redshirting. He did end up starting one game there later in the season. Maybe it was the Missouri game.
That was Missouri, yeah.
So Tony Morrell's reporting says that, according to one of his sources, who I probably have a great idea of who that source is that's very close to that situation, says right now that they would not be a bit surprised if Big Tree is not the best, or right behind Josiah Thompson as the best lineman in the program. And so to me, I call it the Big Tree conundrum, because I don't think you're going to move Josiah Thompson to right tackle. I think he is an NFL left tackle and probably will play 2 more years and be a top 10 pick in the NFL if he doesn't get injured. But if Big Tree is the second best or just as good, tied for the best offensive lineman in the program, I think I want him at right tackle. But you got Cason Henry there, and you've got, my man switched numbers, so I got to go down number 77 now. Jatavius Shivers at right tackle. You got Cam Pringle, who's down. He's dropped like almost 50 pounds and reshaped his body. He was considered one of the top offensive tackles in the country. And so you got all these guys. And so I call it the Big Tree conundrum. Are you going to play him and Josiah Thompson on the left side? If so, then, let's talk about that before we move to the plethora of options they're going to have at guard.
So before I got on with you, I'm working on something for the site about the 5 biggest questions for South Carolina's offense heading into spring practice. And obviously offensive line is one of them. And, I was sitting there and I was thinking about the same thing about how Tree's probably got a chance to be in the starting lineup. And you're not going to move Josiah from left tackle. I mean, he's locked himself in there. I'm really intrigued with him being at left guard. Like, I think that can be a solid left side to protect the North Sellers backside. And I think long term he can fit at guard, and I think maybe he can see a long term NFL future for him at left guard. And at the same time, with his experience that he gained at left tackle, that's only going to help him at left guard or at a guard position if they do decide to do that. Because he was quick enough to get out to those edge defenders as a true freshman, and then he's going to be on the interior, and he's physical enough and big enough that he could really fit in nicely at that guard. So at that guard spot. So I almost think that he's going to be too good to keep off the field, and I think they're going to find a spot for him. And I'd be really intrigued to see him and Josiah Thompson side by side at left tackle and left guard. And and to your point on the right tackle spot, obviously it sounds like, Casey Henry maybe has solidified himself there, and they've got options there too. Jatavius Shivers, when he came in for that Alabama game, he looked really, really good. And I think it just you mentioned Cam Pringle, like you could go down the list of all the different options at each offensive line spot, and they've built depth in that room to really not have what happened in 2023 happen again.
All right, so let's say things we think we know. Okay. Left tackle, Josiah Thompson. Let's say left guard, Big Tree. Okay. The returns on Boaz Stanley have been phenomenal on just how athletic. I can go back to a guy that I thought was underrated. He didn't play in the NFL because he just couldn't get big enough, but he was very athletic, and that was Alan Knott, was a guy that they could pull in the run game when Sean Elliott was the offensive line coach because of his athleticism. It seems like Boaz Stanley, who was a JUCO All-American at Georgia Military as a true freshman, and then transferred, was injured, took a red shirt, moved to Troy, where he played right tackle and most of his snaps at center, did not give up a sack, I don't think, and didn't have a single penalty all season long. He's pretty much, I think, going to be the guy at center. And so then if you look out there at right tackle and say, well, it's Casey Henry and Jatavius Shivers. Then at guard, you got Marquis Anderson, Trevon Ball, who was a freshman All-American and freshman SEC at right guard, who you brought in a guy who's going to NFL Combine in Torricelli Simpkins and was an FCS All-American. And he said, okay, I'll play behind this guy. He's a pro for a year. Well, now, if Big Tree's the left guard, you brought in Rodney Newsom and Nick Sharp, transfer guys, and you got Marquis Anderson. And I want to ask this, could you see him compete with Boaz Stanley at center? Because I know that he has been working on snapping the ball. And look, I'm not throwing dirt on Ryan Brubaker either. I mean, Vershawn Lee got injured in the Clemson game, and they brought Brubaker in to snap the ball. And you didn't even hardly know the guy was in the game because it was a clean operation.
Yeah, it's just crazy how many options that they have here. It was the same thing with defensive backfield. There's a lot of different options. And starting at center, I think I'd lead toward Boaz Stanley right now being the starter. I mean, just with his experience and what he's bringing to the table, I think he's kind of where I'd lean right now. But, I mean, Marquis Anderson's a guy who you hear a lot of good things about. It's been a struggle to stay healthy his first 2 years. And, if he can stay healthy, I think he's going to have a battle for that center spot, or, maybe, who knows, maybe he battles for one of the guard spots as well. But, right now, I think I'd lead toward Boaz starting at safety or center. And then that right guard spot is really interesting too because of the options they have. And Trevon Ball is one that I almost wonder if he's kind of in the same thing with Tree Bobley. He may be too good to keep off the field. I mean, we saw what he did as a freshman All-American. I think Pro Football Focus had him as a freshman All-American, freshman All-SEC honors as a freshman. And then, as you mentioned, they just brought in a lot of really good offensive linemen in the trio of guys or the two with Torricelli and Kamar Bell, that they really kind of wanted that experience in there. But that right guard spot, you also, Nick Sharp, you mentioned, he could be right in that starting spot. So the 2 deep is going to be really solid at South Carolina. And I think it's the same with the backfield of they just got to find the best 5 that fit together. And that's going to be the goal for spring practice. And I think you can see a lot of moving parts throughout spring practice. And I think maybe you'd hope by preseason camp they had that solid 5 that you kind of saw last year. Starting with preseason camp, they really knew who the 5 were going to be, and they let them roll through preseason camp to build that continuity and chemistry. And I think that'd be the goal again. But that right guard spot, I'd almost lean Trevon Ball, but would not be surprised if Nick Sharp wins it too for what he did at Wake Forest. But I don't know. I like Trovon Ball, and I really like what he showed as a freshman. I wouldn't be surprised if he runs himself into the starting five as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this would be something to look at, Gamecocks. It's a kind of a, I don't know if it's a win-win, but if Trovon Ball's not the best guy, I don't know that he's going to sit around and wait another year, because that's going to be 2 years in a row. Probably he's replaced by somebody from the transfer portal. But at the same time, that means you brought in guys that are better than him, that are veteran players to replace him. So it is going to be intriguing on the offensive line. All right, so you mentioned Rasul Faison. We saw Oscar Attaway Jr. He's dropped a little bit of weight. I think he wants to get quicker and more explosive, because I think he's ramping up as the most experienced returning back on the roster. But, Jawan Howell, I think, is supremely talented. And, from sources inside the building, they said Matthew Fuller just need to learn the nuances of the game, but that he was just as physical as Rocket Sanders was. And so I think this is a really good situation to have 4 quality guys and 2 guys that are very experienced at the college level, and then 2 really talented young guys.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned kind of at the top, bringing in Rasul Faison was probably one of the biggest transfer portal pickups for them, and we saw what he did at Utah State. I mean, he's really good, and I think he's got a solid chance to be that starting spot. But guys like Oscar Attaway, like he's gonna battle for that too. But we saw what he could do at that number 2 spot at running back, and that he did a solid job. He came in and took over the carries for when Rocket Sanders needed to go out, and we saw. I think he kind of flashed a little bit of what he can do too in the Citrus Bowl when he took over at that number 1 spot and had that long touchdown run on the 4th down. So they're in a good spot at running back. And you mentioned Jawan Howell, I think he was just continued to adjust to the SEC level in his first year, but you could see the explosiveness and the fat and the quick twitch that he had. Like some of those touchdown runs he had against, I think it was Akron maybe or Walford. I mean, you could see the explosion. You saw it in the Citrus Bowl too when he got in there. I mean, he's a physical runner, downhill runner, but he's also athletic and fast. And he obviously had the fumbles, so that kind of, I think, maybe put a little bit of a damper on his performance. But I mean, you can see the potential and the flashes there. And with Matthew Fuller, I remember seeing him in preseason camp, and you're like, that guy could physically could be ready to roll right now. I mean, he's a big running back, and I think like you mentioned, just kind of learning how to be an SEC back and adjusting to the game. But I mean, that having him as maybe a second or third option too. I mean, that the running backs room is in a good spot, and they're continuing to build it. But I think for 2025, they have to like where they are.
No doubt about it. So, wide receiver. Let's just start with this question. How big is it for South Carolina and for Nicholas Harbor himself that he is prioritizing football? He's going through indoor track, which is going to do nothing but help him, but I'm sure he's probably lifting some weights as well. But him going through spring practice and then being with the team in the summer prior to fall camp, we saw how he came on. I mean, I was at the Oklahoma game, and there was like a square in route where Lenora Sellers threw it up, and he just went up and got it right with his hands. I mean, picture perfect. We saw him run away from defenders. He's a guy that you have to account for. And I think, what are your thoughts on him not skipping spring? How big is it for him, and how big is it for Mike Shula, for Mike Furry, and for the wide receiver position for him to be totally engaged in football after the way he's finished last season?
Yeah, it allows him to go right into building off the way he performed in that back half of the season and have his sole focus really on building off of that. And obviously, Mike Furry did a pretty incredible job of helping, and credit to Nick Harbor, too, for all the work he put in to continue improving at wide receiver. And I mean, he's a guy who could have a breakout season, I think, in 2025 if things continued on track that they were. I mean, you saw in that back half of the season, he started to just look like a wide receiver. Like he started to make the wide receiver plays. His routes started to look a little more crisper. He was open and made the easy catches, and also had some catch and runs too. And I mean, obviously, everybody remembers the big play and the awesome catch he had against Alabama late in that game. And I think just having that, not doing the indoor track, and just having his sole focus on workouts and into spring practice is only going to allow him to continue to build on a lot of really good that he showed in that back half of the season.
I mean, I think we saw the signs, and I think with another year of development, he is capable of being a wide receiver one in the Southeastern Conference. Well, you've also got Mazeo Bennett Jr. He's back. He played a lot as a true freshman. He's a guy that's always hungry and that has tremendous work ethic. He could play in the slot or outside. Jared Brown, we saw what he was capable of doing when he took that tunnel screen to the house against Missouri. On yesterday's pod, I mentioned like that, probably that final 2.5 minutes of the first half of the Missouri game, or 3 minutes, South Carolina scored 14 points in the last minute and 57 seconds of the half. I thought that was some of the best coaching of the Shane Beamer era, with the play calling, scoring, using your timeouts, getting Missouri off the field, and then them being in that shell with the two high safeties going to the tunnel screen and getting the downfield blocking and springing a guy like Jared Brown, who was banged up a lot. I think he was a guy that had to get his body adjusted to being in the SEC. Those guys are back. And the guy that you heard a lot of buzz, who did not have the benefit of spring practice last year and who got injured but started off in the starting lineup, Vandrevis Jacobs. That gives you 4 returning guys at wide receiver. Talk about them before we get into these 6 unbelievable freshman wide receivers.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we mentioned Nick Harbor, then you got the other guys. Mazeo Bennett, you saw the flashes there as a true freshman, and you always see the biggest jump from these players from year 1 to year 2, and I'm really intrigued to see that with Mazeo Bennett. I mean, he is a fluid route runner, really polished wide receiver, and then I think it was just continue to, like the rest of these guys, he was a freshman in the SEC, and he showed a lot of flashes of potential. I think I'm really intrigued to see his year 1 to year 2 jump. And Jared Brown, too. I mean, you mentioned that he showed his speed. I mean, we knew how fast he was, but on that screen in Missouri, I mean, he ran away from the defenders. I mean, he was full speed. And I think that's he's one where he kind of had almost like a sneaky good season last year. Like, it was a pretty solid season. It just, he battled some injuries there in the middle of the season. I think maybe held him back a little bit, but I think you really started to see him get healthy later in the season. You saw that against Missouri. So, I mean, he's one that he can be a downfield threat. And if Harbor continues to develop like he can with his speed, I mean, you got 2 really good downfield threats right there with Jared Brown and Nick Harbor. Then if you throw in a Mazeo Bennett right in there, who can really run routes well, I mean, it could end up being a solid group before we even start mentioning these freshman receivers. And then Dre Jacobs too. I mean, you also saw flashes there too of his potential. And I think he was just obviously he battled some injuries there towards the end of the season, but now he's entering his second year of being really somebody that's relied on at wide receiver. Because at FSU, his first year, he didn't get much playing time, but as a freshman, or his first year this year at South Carolina, he was relied on early on. So I think it's going to be interesting to see his jump heading into year 2 at South Carolina.
Yeah, because he was, he and Dale Von Campbell, they didn't come in until the summer, and he was a true freshman. And, you heard the buzz about how this guy's maybe the most naturally gifted wide receiver on the team. He was in the starting lineup. Then he was out. Then he, when you come in that late, you don't really learn or know what's fully expected, I think. And as a young player, I think, bringing it every single day and the consistency and the work ethic, hopefully we see that improve after going through a year now, winter workouts and then spring practice, because I think he is a very talented guy. And then, good Lord, Malik, Lex Cyrus is a sub 10, 400-meter guy. Malik Clark at 6'2", 190 is a 10, 500-meter guy. Jordan Gidron, 17 years old, and won't turn 18 until the end of October of his freshman year in high school. He's 6'2", 190, and he was as a sophomore. Yep. He was a 100 and 200-meter state track champion. And I still hadn't mentioned Jaden Sellers or Donovan Murph, who I think may be the most polished of all of these guys, who also reclassified, signed with the Gamecocks, committed it shortly after he decided to reclassify, went public at the Under Armour All-America game, then went out and made like a Dez Bryant one-handed twisting catch on the sideline, showing his ability. So we talked about the 4 scholarship guys returning, and now you're going to add 6 freshmen. Obviously, not all of them are going to be ready. I don't think Jaden Sellers even gets talked about as much, but the talent is there. And the one thing we've seen from Mike Furry is he can definitely coach his guys up.
Yeah, it's, with these freshman receivers, like they almost all seem like they could be ready to go. I think you do have to wonder too, kind of what we talked about with some of these other guys, like just getting ready to play SEC football, because that's a big difference from high school to college and into the SEC ball. But these guys, I think their mentality from what you've seen so far and here so far, like they're coming in and they're working and they're competing with each other every day. And the biggest thing that stands out with this group is the length and speed. You mentioned some of their track numbers and then their length. It's an impressive group. And I think Malik Clark and Brian Rowe are two to really watch in spring practice, along with Jordan Gidron. I think those 3 right now are ones I'm really interested to see. But don't forget about Jaden Sellers either. That he was really good at South Florida. You could watch some of his highlights in the state championship game, and he was really good. And that's another one to not watch out for. And then Lex Cyrus, I'm interested. I think he can contribute at receiver as a freshman, but I'm interested to see how he can help maybe in the return game. Yes. I think he could be one that could absolutely help there. You see that in this film. He's an explosive, and he kind of just has that, the body form for that being a returner. I wonder if he can maybe fit in as maybe not a punt returner, or maybe he can, but I think you think about Jalen Kilgore, Vicari Swain being there. But I'm interested to see if they get him helping in the return game from a kickoff standpoint, because I think he could be pretty good there. And I think he has a career there. You'll see a lot of him at South Carolina there in that spot as well.
So we know Nick Harbor's been atop Bruce Feldman's freak list for the last 2 years. He probably will be again this coming year. But after him, Brian Rowe, that dude is a freak athlete. You saw at 5'11", the highlight reel dunks in basketball. The same guy that that coached Jalen Brooks in high school, who plays for the Dallas Cowboys in the National Football League. He also coached Brian Rowe, and he said, hey, look, at the same stage, it's no question, Brian Rowe is a superior player. We heard about it when they came in for bowl practice, that he really flashed more than any of the other guys. He's had a great winter workouts by all accounts, and another late riser. in this class, and a guy from the Tar Heel State, South Carolina, getting 3 guys from North Carolina. And from talking with Hale earlier, they're well positioned with several of the premier players in that state for this year. But man, Brian Rowe, he just seemed to keep climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing. I mean, he was one of several guys after South Carolina offered. You saw Georgia and other programs jump in and offer him.
Yeah, his athleticism is kind of off the chart. I mean, he's a basketball player, and obviously, I mean, he can jump out of the gym. I mean, his athleticism is unreal. And I think now the big step for him is with Mike Furry, and a big thing for Mike Furry to help him with is continue to improve, with the little things at wide receiver, which all freshmen have to go through. But I think what he brings to the table athletically is something that really stands out. And now it's just kind of honing in those wide receiver skills going up against, the best defensive backs in the country.
No doubt about it. Alex, great stuff as always, man. I can't thank you enough for being so generous with your time and for being with us. And I think Hale said March 3rd, the dead period is lifted. Players can start coming to campus. I'm sure you, Hale, Tony, JC will have it all covered at thebigspur.com. And I think a lot of big-time players in the Carolinas and Georgia this year, and in that DMV area that South Carolina's involved with, it's going to be interesting to see the list of guys coming through.
Yeah, I mean, coming off the season South Carolina had, I mean, it should be a pretty exciting spring for them with not only one, you kind of figure out all these position battles we talked about in spring practice, but bringing in some potential future players and recruits that it's going to be in a pretty impressive list I think they're bringing in, and that kind of leads up into the spring game visit schedule, and then that leads into trying to finish out that 2026 class with the OV schedule in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Rodney Dunham from up there in Charlotte, and we know 2 years ago, Dylan Stewart was standing on the sideline and in the stands for South Carolina spring game, and he became a Gamecock. And I think, they're really selling him on, hey, look at what they've done, not just with Dylan Stewart, but with other guys. I mean, who even knew about Kyle Kennard before he played for Sterling Lucas, right? The proximity to home, the opportunity to come in and play immediately. And then the same for Samari Matthews, Gordon Sellers at wide receiver, Aiden and Andrew Harris, Ben Bolware and Noah Clark at defensive tackle. South Carolina is involved with elite players from the Tar Heel State.
Yeah, that, and I was going to say at that edge spot, don't forget about Julian Walker as well. I mean, I think that guy is one who continued rising the rankings at Dutch Fork, and I think obviously South Carolina's in a good spot there, and don't forget about that guy.
I mean, you still, though, to me, I worry about somebody like Lane Kiffin hiring his dad to be the head strength coach. Like we know he was at Arkansas. Shane Beamer targeted him, right? Like he wanted the guy that was at Oregon that went to Miami with Mario Cristobal, the guy with the big mustache, right? But Jamil Walker was a guy that was targeted before Day got the position. And then you wound up getting him anyway. And now his son's 6'6", probably 250 pounds. I know they list him at 230, but he looks bigger than that to me. Right there in your backyard. And there are certainly in the trenches some big-time players in the state of South Carolina for this class as well. I know we'll get into that down the road. Alex, be well, my friend, and can't thank you enough for being with us and for being so generous with your time today.
Absolutely. I always enjoy being on. I'll see you next time.
All right, you got it. All right, that was Alex Jones. Hey, that's a lot of meat and potatoes you got today on Gamecock Football Recruiting, and previewing spring practice. I hope everybody enjoyed that. It's been a great show. And so, for special thanks to Hale McGranahan and Alex Jones, this has been episode number 1699. I'll be back tomorrow on Gamecock Pod Daily. Until then, God bless. Go Gamecocks. I am out of here.